ratification, adopt the agenda. If you can all stand, pledge of the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first up will be comments from the audience regarding agenda items. Per policy 0167.3, this is the only time public participation is permitted. Comments are limited to current agenda items. Anyone having legitimate interest in an agenda item may participate. Attendees must register their intention to speak upon their arrival at the meeting. Participants are to preface their comments by announcing their name and address and group affiliation when appropriate. Comments are limited to 3 minutes unless extended by the board president, and no participant may speak more than once on the same topic. Comments are to be directed to the board. No person may address or question board members individually, and any person or group wishing to have an item considered for the agenda shall submit their request to the superintendent no later than 14 calendar days prior to the meeting. Anyone have any comments? Okay, excellent. So we'll move on to 4, the gifts, donations, recognition, student and staff spotlight, and it'll be an Edgerton Elementary School PTO donation. Chris?
No, he doesn't know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
thought you were sitting there because you didn't talk about it. I apologize. All right.
That was priceless. Did you want to talk about it? You or Quinn? Because I know you were at the meeting.
Well, yeah.
Sure, go for it then.
Go ahead.
Why do they have to get approved every
It's
time?
not an approval, this is a recognition of it.
Yeah, we're not
Of
voting.
the
just-
rug?
Pardon?
Of the rug?
We're
the
not voting on
donation.
it. We're just saying thank you for the donation.
Okay,
Yeah, I can talk about that then.
yeah.
Yeah.
John could too, he was there.
So it came to the PTO meeting. One of the parents has been volunteering and thought that the kids could benefit from a rug in the area where they sit and get a story read to them. And so the PTO graciously decided that was a good idea and gave us the funds to be able to put that in our school. It got delivered a few days ago by the same volunteer. She was like door-to-door service on that. And yeah, the kids are using it and they're loving it.
Cool.
And it really brightens up our library.
So the conversation went that we needed, or the PTO needed to have that approved prior to donating. Is there a dollar value? Is
Yep.
it above $1,000?
$1,000, the board has to approve it as per policy.
Okay, so anything under $1,000.
We just like to recognize gifts like that point, but this is not for board approval, it's just to recognize gifts or
Okay.
things that were donated.
But-
Yep.
But if it is a donation above $1,000, that needs to be approved. Okay, well, we can bring that back to them. Thank you.
And thank you to the PTO. 5 is consent agenda. A is approval of February vouchers and vouchers payable. B is approval of January 22nd, January 29th, and February 12th, 2018 school board minutes. C is approval of Elmbrook 66.03.01 2018 to 19 agreement. D, approval of wrestling co-op renewal. E, approval of retirement requests. And F, approval of teacher contract. Would anyone like to pull an agenda item?
D and E.
Okay. Anyone else like to pull an item?
Hold on one second here. E? F.
Okay. Anyone else like to pull an item? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to approve items 5A, B, and C.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. So Kevin, we'll start with you. So D.
Yeah, do you know roughly how many students we have from Greendale participating, or what the mix is this year? Or was this year?
I believe there were around 10 from Greendale on the team. I can double check the numbers.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Because it
if
fluctuated throughout the season. Some kids left and that, but the majority were still Whitnall students.
Okay, that's all I really wanted to know.
Okay. Okay, and then E?
Yeah, E, just wanted to recognize the retirees. We had Jan Hahn. She's been with the district since '99. She started in the high school as a biology teacher and then moved to the middle school to serve as a math interventionist. Terry Litsky was hired way back in 1987, and she served as special education teacher at the middle school since she was hired. Stephen Petrie has been a social worker with us since 1994, served in all of our buildings. Linda Quinnell, who I had as a teacher, has been at the middle school since '91. She's taught language arts and served as the K-12 coordinator for social studies, as well as the 8th grade department chair, and Sally Stoll, who has taught first grade since 1989 with us. So thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you all. F.
And that's the transfer and adjustment? That's the contract?
There is. So in the past, that staff person has sort of, throughout the years, has had sometimes has taught a class or whatever, and she's had this combination of a contract. And based on a recent adjustment that we made to the middle school, she would be in a teaching position. And so it was and because of that, we didn't want to just pay an hourly one or a daily sub rate. We felt it was better to just give a contract, which doesn't change benefits or anything like that from that person, but we felt it was a better, it accurately reflects what we're asking her to do at that date. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, any other questions on those 3 items? All right, so then I'll take a motion to approve items 5D, E, and F.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 6 is action items. Do I have a motion to set, to approve item A, job descriptions?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion, questions?
Nothing's changed since they were presented a few weeks ago?
Nope.
Okay. So all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Item 7 is reports. A is a superintendent report and monthly update of district goals.
So Kathy will put that up there. For the board, it's in that folder. I just keep updating it each month as I report out the district goals. So goal number 1, again, has to do with our promoting a learning environment. Some of the activities that we've done this month, a lot of emphasis on the middle school students. So we designed a response to intervention model. If you remember, it's been shared. I think Lynn shared it with us back. What looks like a diamond, both tiers of intervention for our students who are struggling a little bit and those who need more challenges. And so we redefined that this year to be very specific a couple weeks ago for our middle school. And then we went back and looked at our mid-year STAR achievement data. We had not been serving all of our students in the way that we should be, and so we went and assigned every student who needed to be, who was in the 25th percentile or below in an intervention during their connect time. And for our students who were in the percentage of the 15th percentile or above, which is part of that, to be in connect, to be working to get more challenged in that, whether that was reading or in math. Students who qualified for that were parents were sent a letter home per guidelines for Title I. And so a lot of work around that to make sure that all of the students were getting their needs met specifically there.
And that's about all our buildings?
We have been doing that in our elementaries already, and those benchmarks have been sort of set. They have data meetings regularly and are looking at that, so we have been serving those students. There was a lot of things that were in the way of why we were not at the middle school, and so that needed to sort of be reset. And so students last week were reassigned to those connects, and we have intervention teachers, math and reading, that are serving all of those students on both sides of that spectrum.
Do you know what day those letters were mailed out? It was last week though, right?
Yep, the people who mailed them are not here, so I don't know.
That's fine, okay.
Yep. And then on February 19th, we had Dr. Frontier come in, Cardinal Stritch. He was formerly the curriculum director at Whitefish Bay at the time that actually Dr. Rickabaugh was there, but he teaches in the doctoral program now. But one of his things that he consults on is student assessment and how to create assessments that actually measure learning. And so we had a full day staff in service with him as we look at learning to make sure that our teachers are accurately measuring learning and giving the right feedback that they need to. And then we've decided to move forward with something called Rigor, Relevance, and Relationships Framework for Curriculum. So under the goals that are here, we've talked about how do we put learning targets where what teachers should be teaching in the classroom. And so looking at how do teachers set what that looks like. And so the curriculum right now, in order to get a standard language that teachers are using the same, we've decided to go with that framework. And so Linda's working on that and getting that set for our teachers. Goal number 2 talks about maintaining our student achievements at the highest academic levels. Right now, we did mail our fall and winter star reports to our middle and high school students. That was not done in the fall. Our elementary schools did that, and for some reason our middle and high school students did not. And so high school, this is the first year that they did anything that was formative, and so we mailed those out to parents. And so they have that data, and we started to introduce how to read those scores, what that means for your child. We should be looking at growth from where they tested in the fall. And so that was something that had not been done, and so we fixed that in February. Goal 3 has to do for the college career and life readiness. We continue to attend some of the Redefining Ready regional meetings. There was one held at Greenfield High School this past week that Lynn attended. And we are continuing to gather some of our Whitnall data, and you'll see a little bit of it coming up here. But 2 weeks ago, we obviously had a board meeting in which there was a lot of data. There's still a lot more for us to look at. And so as we decide what does our district scorecard look like, you will see us continuing to do that about what are the indicators, what are others in the region using to indicate success. Goal number 4 has to do with our communication, and I would say that we are just getting ready right now to send out our next Whitnall window. So the last one was sent out the first week in January. We're hoping that the first full week in March it'll arrive in households for our March issue. And then the communication specific to referendum. So there's an item on here later, so we sort of have some crossover here, but so we can talk a little bit more about that when we get to the topic on the agenda. But we updated the referendum website that has 9 videos on it. It has FAQs specifically around tax questions and how people can absentee vote now that our primaries are done, the February 20th election. We should have all received as residents our referendum flyer that went to all the district residents. We've been updating our social media posts. A couple more went out today, both about the meetings that are happening and then facts about the referendum. We held 2 informational meetings on February 15th and the 20th. We have one at the Hales Corners Library this week, and then a couple more coming up, and a couple other superintendent drop-ins, if you will, at Culver's and the Greenfield Public Library. So that's specific to the activities that we've done in February to that goal. The financial plan and the budget, Mike shared with you 2 weeks ago a lot of restructuring with centralizing expenses, and that's a big shift and adjustment as we're pulling those out of building budgets and trying to become more efficient and effective in our purchasing, especially when they're purchasing very similar services or supplies. So that's one of the big shifts in trying to create and then plan forward for a long-term budget. Have a better idea where some of those expenses are coming from. Integrating a lot of our operational systems. We, as you just approved, the first set of job descriptions and have drafted the second set, which we'll bring forward to you in March. We've started to get into Infinite Campus a little bit more. There were student emails were not in there. We've started to look at district messaging and gradebook features that have been never turned on and used in terms of parent communication or student communication, emergency messaging. So really trying to, Todd Stacy has really been our Infinite Campus person. We're trying to train him so we can really be using a lot of the tools that we already have that are integrated instead of creating a lot of other things that just haven't been used up until this point. And Mike and Karen have worked on the draft of a support staff compensation handbook. And in that handbook, there are wage bands for support staff. They've done some research with comparable districts, so they've been gathering a lot of research with southeastern Wisconsin districts, creating different categories based on employee classification, and then evaluation systems based on that, and then also a micro-credential model. So they have a draft of that. After the job descriptions get done, and we'll move into that. So I've seen that, and there's some really good work in there. I think that will help us because right now some of those elements are missing across the district. Goal 8 relates to the becoming an employer of choice. And just as stated, we're putting a support staff compensation handbook. So when we are hiring people, we've hired a couple support staff members in the last month, and it would be very helpful to have that handbook as we're sharing with them and hiring them what it involves in terms of training and a lot of the other things. Also, we'll share it with the board once it's completed, the comparable district wage schedules. Mike has created where the average is and where Whitnall falls on that, and it's interesting across different wage classifications where we fall in terms of those. Sometimes we're right in the middle, sometimes we're on the low end of that, so that might take us a while to recalibrate. We can't do that all at once, but people who were way outside the highest range in some classifications compared to other districts, we might have to talk about how we sort of slow that growth down, and when we have some people who are way lower than the lowest that we can find in other districts, we may have to decide how we do that. So that may be a personnel committee coming up, but they've been doing a lot of work and research with both business managers and HR managers in different districts. And then the last one has to do with creating a school environment about being safe and secure, and that also is another topic coming up here shortly. We talked a lot about culture and climate. We've been spending a lot of time recently around school safety, physically safe, mentally, emotionally safe, and so we've been. That's really where the efforts have come since the last time we met in February. So we have a topic on there. So I didn't want to elaborate too much on here because it's a board agenda item. So that's it.
Thank you. And then B is the referendum update.
Yeah, so Kathy, do you want to pull the website up there? I thought I would just show you. So we have some poster boards that we put out there. We were a polling place last week. So we had information out there with the sign, the poster board, and we had a lot of people stop and talk and ask, so a lot.
When I came and voted, people were looking at it when I came in and when I left.
Yeah, it was, and we put the information out there. Obviously, we can't say vote yes, but it was just there, and people were grabbing it, and they actually asked questions. So sort of, I'd like to say that it was planned, but it was sort of like after I came in and voted, I'm like, And so surprisingly, for only one question on the ballot, there were a lot of people here at the primary at this polling place. And so we had a lot of traffic there. So if you look at the website, you can see the 9 videos that are out there. They're all in there. The last one is on how to absentee vote. So if you haven't taken a look at those, we can see how many views each of them have had. I think the last time we were looking, the tax impact one, the pool, and Hales Corners Elementary had the highest number of views. And so we were
Hundreds? Or not hundreds?
I don't know, I haven't looked lately. Last week there was like 50 some or something after they got out there. So, although I think Lori and Mike and Todd were going to have a little competition, and we're telling all their family members to go and watch to see that they can get the most popular video. There. So, and then we also have a little bit lower down, Kathy. We added an FAQ. So after the 2 listening sessions that we had, there were some questions, and primarily the FAQs are all around tax impact and just school finance and those types of things. So we created an FAQ document on there, and Logan does get occasional emails. I think he said he got 3 or 4 over the weekend, but they were all similar questions like, is the loan for 20 years? How does that work with interest rates? And so we continue to refer them to that document, or we add them if it's a new question, and usually refer them to Mike. So we'll continue to add that FAQ as we get more questions right now. But I just wanted to share that's probably, in addition to some of our social medias, the Whitnall window will have some 2 new pages on that will be in there, and we just approved a postcard that will come out the week before voting. We also have, we are getting a couple yard signs for us that don't say vote yes, but that say vote, and we'll probably put them along Janesville Road and 116th just to remind people visually that there is a vote going on. So that's what we have planned or coming up with referendum and facilities.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, moving on to C, strategic planning and student achievement data.
So, Kathy, you want to view? So Lynn isn't here tonight, so we just wanted to briefly, so I'm covering for a couple of things we put together. Down at the bottom, there's the little view thing. To the right. This one? Oh, here. Yep. If you go up to the slideshow tab at the top, you can also do like play from current slides.
Go to
Do you have a
slideshow.
tab that says slideshow?
Yeah, there's a tab. Right
Oh, right.
there.
You can do play from current slide if you're in the first one. Yep. So here's the presentation that, a part of it only, that we've been sharing at the parent grading meetings, because I think the journeys have sort of come together in terms of grading and assessing and student achievement. So you can click the down arrow, Kathy, I think. So these are just a few of the selected slides that we wanted to share in terms of what she's talking about. You can go down to the next step. So we've been talking about, you can click another one, I didn't know she has all these on delay. Student achievement and then grading assessment. And so she's been doing some student achievement data also at the grading meetings, because I think it sort of talks about the why we need to look at that in terms of that, as we shared with the board last time. You can go to the next slide. So we looked at some of this data last time in terms of some of the middle school data and all of that that you see. And I think what tonight we were going to do is, I think Jonathan had a specific question, because last time, if you go to the next slide, Kathy, we looked at sort of AP scores and then what that letter grade in the class looked like. And I think Jonathan had a question then, well, how do middle school scores look like as compared to their grades? And remember, they're in a standards base, so they have exceeds, proficient, developing, and basic. And so we wanted to answer that specific question and then see what other questions to bring forward, because we decided we were going to keep this a topic there. So if you go to the next slide, Kathy. So if you look at two of the redefining ready, two of the factors, the student achievement data that you should look at are third grade reading and eighth grade math. They will tell you from research that those are two scores that have indicators when students are college and career ready. So, and those are also the indicators on the state report card right now. So if you look at that, ironically, there's been enough research to say that if a child can read at third grade, they've set themselves up good. And if they're at a place to doing math by eighth grade, that's where, so there's some catching up that you can do in terms of math, but by third grade, we're starting to see some indications, in terms of what that means in the future. So when you look at that and the scores that you see right there in relationship to third grade reading, so you have the letter grade, and then you have sort of the
Forward exam grade, right?
yeah, the forward exam and the grade that you see in there. So just see if she has. So this is third grade reading. So if you look on the left, and we also did third grade math because a comparable. So what's in blue is what the forward score was in terms of beginning, developing, proficient, and exceeding. And then the orange, if you will, is what their letter grade was. So it's interesting. I'm gonna see. Maybe I should have pointed out, but I will for the sake of time. When you look at the elementary comparable, and the next slide in a second I'll show you is eighth grade. So if you look at how the third grade looks like, I feel like I have this teacher thing going on right now, but like I'm going to ask this teacher a question. But so would you say that the assessment, the forward exam score, is higher or lower than the grades that they're actually being given?
It's higher.
Okay.
It's higher, yeah, with the exception of the basic.
Yeah. So if you look at that in terms of basic is a good example. So the forward exam, we have 17 kids who got basic, and 6 of those got beginning. But if you let's read it a little bit more. So if you look at proficient, it's saying that 69 students received proficient on the forward exam, but only 41 of those same students received a proficient grade from our teachers. So actually our teachers in elementary are grading harder than the forward exam. You see that?
Yeah, you can see where the peak of the two graphs
Right.
are.
So, right, clearly there's so some of those 69 students were getting a developing when potentially on the forward exam. So in terms of exceeding, we have 21 of our students on the forward exam for third grade reading that achieved exceeding, but none of those in the classroom was giving a comparable grade to that in reading. So in elementary, especially on the proficient and exceeding, our teachers are actually grading harder, if that makes sense. I want to be careful that I'm not correlating things too strongly here. I just want to give you a sense of what that looks like. That our elementary teachers are in terms of what that looks like. Again, very similar in terms of math grades, where you see where the blue bar is higher than the orange bar. I mean, I'm not saying that they should be equal. We're not at all saying that there is this direct correlation to what goes into that. But I guess, a similar, if we're having those standards that are there. So Kathy, if you go to the next one, and this is 8th grade. You should have saw the orange and the blue did a pretty significant flip in where that was. So if you look at, for example, 8th grade English language arts, 53 of our students are proficient, our 8th graders were last year in English language arts on the forward exam, but 143 of them achieved a proficient score in their English class. In math, for proficient, we had 65 of our students who received a proficient score, and 57 of them received a proficient grade. It's just a cursory glance, but I think when the question was asked, and so we're just providing you the data from last time, as we looked at AP scores and letter grades. Again, I want to be careful that we don't too closely correlate it, because obviously there are some other impacts, but there should be at least some indication if a student is, if our standards are aligned to what students are being asked to do. In those cases, there should be at least some correlation that you can see. So, if you want to go to the last slide, Kathy. Some of the things in terms of what we're doing. So those are the questions, obviously. So this is some of the data that's being shared with parents at the grading meetings who are coming to try to understand grading isn't perfect right now, and it hasn't been for a while. And if you look at that, the correlation to other student achievement data, there's got to be some indications if that's what we're using for student feedback. So we did, as I mentioned before, on February 19th, have Dr. Frontier come in and talked about how to do valid and reliable assessments. He will be coming back on the next professional development day on March 19th also. We are reviewing right now all of our standards and learning targets to make sure they're as rigorous as they need to be. And that's why I talked to you about that rigor and relevance framework. Looking at the verb, for example, you could start what students should learn by a word as simple as define or explain. Or you could use a different word like compare and contrast or analyze. So we want to make sure that the rigor that we're asking students to demonstrate is the same level of rigor that they need to have, because it's different to just lay a definition out versus actually understand what that means and apply it at the end of the day. So taking a look at those standards and making sure that they align to ACT standards and a lot of the other standardized tests that we're using, which is our next statement. They're starting to get truly trained on that. We're working with our K-12 content people right now to make sure they understand what that framework will mean to them. We are consistently, constantly, all the time, however you want to say it, having meetings with our staff, whether it's individual teachers, groups, grade levels, departments, to talk about the use of grading scales. So we'll have a situational come up and we'll talk to either an individual teacher or come back and say, and a lot of times it's just explaining and re-explaining to some of the teachers to make sure that they are understanding what that means. Sometimes they're not accurately describing it to parents or students, and so we're just having to be very diligent on making sure we have that consistent message and then we're applying it appropriately. And then we're looking at some of our reporting formats in Infinite Campus, because part of it is that some of those, again, as I shared with you before, have not been set up appropriately in Infinite Campus to share with parents and students when they look at the grade book. It's not what the teacher sees, and so there's a lot of disconnect from what that looks like. I think I shared with the board in an email, one of our parents brought up at the first grading meeting that the weighted GPA scale, which has been around since 1995, we looked at the board policy. Charlie's on a search for Whitnall historical documents, I think, lately. But that was the last time that the board had, and I think that predates almost everybody here being on the board. But the weighted grading scale is not an equal 1.0 across the board. And I'm not sure why that is. And so a parent asked about it, and I think Charlie, Lynn, and I didn't really have an answer. So typically, when you take a weighted class, if you're getting a 4.0 as an A, that would be a 5.0 in a weighted class. Or if you got a 3.0, it would be a 4.0. It doesn't work that way. It's different points, like a 0.83 for some of them, and a 0.76 and I don't know why none of us had, I don't know. So we can change it mid-year, but we do believe that we need to fix it for next year. That will get complicated for students next year because they will have taken class. So we may have to just start with our freshman class, because we can't go back and re-weight, because different kids would have taken different weighted classes in different years and all of that stuff. So we're going to explore it. Guidelines, administrative guidelines for that are coming up. Neola's coming in this Thursday. We're gonna ask them to sort of take that out of sequence to look at that specific one, but I think there's a lot of logistics in re-implementing it, but we're unclear why. Because they were saying if a student actually gets a B, they're getting more penalized than if they would have taken a regular class with, like, it was really strange.
Percentage-wise,
Yeah, like, because you don't get the same bump if you got like a B as compared to a B minus. It was a really strange scenario. We did not have an answer for that, other than we'll look into it. So we just want to make sure, I mean, there's stuff that, obviously this has nothing to do with standards-based grading or something. I think it's just bringing out like every possible potential solution and things that we've just sort of lived with, but it's leaving no stone unturned, I guess, in all of this. So that was specific to answer. I think you had the question last time about that. So I guess if there are other specific ones that you want us to bring forward next time in looking at data, otherwise we do have another batch of data that we'll bring forward that we've been working on behind the scenes in terms of student achievement data.
Before we go on to the next, why don't we go around if anybody has any comments or Nancy?
Well, the graphing,
Can you go
is
back
that
to
alarming?
To me or to you?
I know the next one.
Hell, what do I know? I just see a bunch of bars. And
the
I guess it would
eighth
be
grade.
not this one, but the 8th grade
Yeah, the 8th grade.
ELA. Well, I guess from a layperson, it says that we aren't grading properly.
Yes.
You could probably make that assumption in terms of that.
But on the other hand, if you look at it, it looks like we're grading too harshly in the elementary school, but progressing our students along grade-wise, but they're falling behind on the forward exam compared to our grades.
Yeah, so it sort of is magnified because our elementary teachers are even harder graders. And our kids are doing well, and then they come into a system in which the grading appears to be different at the surface, and then so it definitely requires some looking, and that's, I mean, obviously that's what we're doing right now.
Is it because of the standards-based grades that there's subjectivity?
Well, I think there is in letter grades. It's how you decide to do that. There might be more, but there could be, I mean, part of it could be that they're unclear on how to use those letter grades, that they don't, but then that's an issue in and of itself whenever that's been going on for 4 or 5 years, Chris or Lori?
Longer.
Before that, yeah. So clearly that was never fully, whenever that got implemented here, was never fully understood by teachers, and so that could be part of the issue, is they're unclear on what a P or an E means. Could be part of it.
One piece, and Lori chimed in too, I guess. We spent some time this summer, Lynn and the principals, and then talked with the staff at the beginning of the year, redefining what an E is. Because what you often hear is that that's an unachievable mark. Kids would have to be working completely out of level. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why you don't see too many E's. And we redefined that this year. And then we went through with all of the teachers the different levels for the grading and provided some more examples and samples. And I think that's also one of the main components that Tony Frontier is going to come in and do. Look at this as a system, K-12. And part of that work is, might we be grading a little bit more difficult than what the middle school is? According to the forward comparison, yes, but the teachers have not seen this yet. I mean, this was just created, but this would be interesting for them to see and have some opinions on, I think. And then we would go from there. And the other part, and this gets right down to the classroom level with the rubric. What is a 4, 3, 2, 1 on this opinion piece that we're writing right now? You know, what does a 4 paper look like? What does a 3? What does a 2? What does a 1 look like? And so for every single rubric now, you have to go back to that 4-point or 5-point scale if you're in high school, and you have to define that piece. So it's easier said than done. Will take some time. In some areas, we're probably a little bit better than others, but that's going to be the work that, the hard work that we're going to be doing. And I think this will be interesting data to delve into.
I would just add that for us, the reading is a different type of assessment than board exam. Board exam is a multiple choice assessment, and when we are looking at that proficiency markings, that's really based on a one-on-one reading opportunity with a child. So more students are in the developing area as opposed to being proficient. So, that's a curiosity of mine, and it has to do with the difference in the assessments.
Yep. So I think Chris really talked about our elementaries are at that level where they're able to get into the classroom assessments. And I think when you think about something like AP scoring or whatever it is, there's a lot of research that people who are scoring those have to go for the validity of that score. Just like you watched on the Olympics, there's always this, like, it's an average of whatever, right? But there's got to be this consistency of thing that you're looking for. And typically our teachers have not had that level of conversation. They sort of isolated in buckets. And if you think about that at our secondary level, a lot of times it's like everything was points-based and it was either right or wrong. So the whole process of looking at something and sort of thinking about what does this student really know versus it's a right or wrong answer, and like looking at their short answer or their explanation of it. How do teachers actually know if a student knows that? We've not done a lot of conversation around that, so that if you and I were both reading the same short answer, we can read in a student's response. Like if we both took that student's response, we would come up with the same evaluation of it. That's where the heavy lifting has to happen, and that has not happened. And so you're seeing a lot of, and I think Chris is right, I mean, just looking at data, which is what a lot of districts, like our teachers haven't even looked at some of this stuff yet. It hasn't become part of our practice where they're looking at this and saying, can we explain it? Yep, it's not an exact correlation, it's not a parallel, but when you have huge fluctuations like that, it does cause you to like, why is that? That's a huge fluctuation when you saw those bars flip like that in our same school system of a district that's not that large with only 4 buildings. So,
Where does that program come into play that we bought last year?
EduClimber?
There you go.
Yeah, it allows us to grab this data both from behavioral stuff and academics a lot quicker and faster than, so Amy Stenzel, our data and assessment coordinator, that's where she's pulling all of this from. So it takes all of that and stores it in one place, and then she's able to just pull it and put together stuff like this a lot more. We didn't have
That's where this came from?
yeah, a data warehouse like that. So we plug into it all our forward exam, all of our letter grades, and now, because they're all in one location, ACT scores, all of that stuff, AP scores, we can sit and grab and pull different things and then make some charts from it. A lot easier than we could before because it wasn't really housed anywhere.
Good.
So for my money, anytime I see our instructors grading a little bit harder than the national standard, I sleep pretty good at night. I'm all right with that. I am. So that one doesn't bother me so much. This, on the other hand, bothers me quite a bit because I have never wanted Whitnall to be just merely hitting the mark or less than on a national exam. Was this the current 8th grade? This was last year's data.
This was
correct?
current freshmen, right? Because
Right,
the
so our
8th
current
graders haven't
freshmen.
taken it, so our current freshmen, right?
So my question is, what do the current freshman scores look like, and are they bearing this trend out?
Well, so this is the first year that we've done star data with freshmen ever. That was never something we ever did with them. You know, it used to be MAP, and then we just stopped doing it at 8th grade. So this year we said that's not okay because we need to be watching that. And so Charlie's been working with, you know, our literacy coach at the high school. Again, this is new. We've not had interventions at the high school, all of this stuff to be watching. Otherwise, you wait until they take the ACT and hope that they do well,
Yeah,
right?
cross your fingers. But
So-
that's what I'm curious
Yeah.
about. Is that
What
if
was the
this bears
statement you
this-
made? Excuse me. Just about, we never had interventions?
Correct.
Okay.
So we're implementing them now. We have some students started. That's why we have a literacy coach who's been working, she's been working with our English department to look at this stuff. Where were the fall star reports? How did our freshmen do? How did our freshmen do in winter? How many of them did not grow? If this student is still below, we need to get them in one-on-one with our literacy coach working. Their English teacher needs to be aware of it. Other folks need to be aware of it. So there's a lot of work around looking at data, which has not been, this is new territory to our high school. In fact, there was a couple high school teachers who this year, when we introduced the RTI model, when we talked about it in May last year, they're like, that's not a high school thing, that's for elementary schools. Nope, it's a K-12 thing. So we should be giving interventions to all students all the way through, and we just haven't. So we're just, Charlie's been working with our folks there and trying to just set that benchmark about, like we do at our elementary schools. They have data meetings, they talk about students, where are they, how are their scores showing, are they trending in a direction, what intervention is working, what is not working. things outside of their regular classes, not just giving them extra work to do, but like, it might be in reading that they aren't understanding comprehension. Just having them read more isn't gonna help their comprehension. There's gotta be very specific strategies that are used to target. So we have a lot of tools, they just have not been implemented at our high school up until now.
So I would be curious to see if there's enough data on the freshman class, given that it's February or end of almost March, that given different building, different system, what that starts to look like to compare it to what the 8th grade statistics look like for the same cohort.
Well, in fact, I think that was some of the initial information that why we decided that we weren't gonna have an Honors English 9 in that, because we had students who were in Honors English 9 who were less than proficient on their forward exam. So we did just a glance at that, but we can look at how did those students do in their 8th grade scores as compared to how they're doing either letter grade and or their STAR reports now. So
'Cause
that's,
that could bring to light some other issues with grading, but it could also bring to light some issues with abilities in that group. So
yep.
I'd like to see that comparison.
Sure, yep.
Well, not only that, but how we deal with them in the 8th grade, and are they identified, someone who's not proficient should not be going into the honors English class, they should be identified and out.
But then too, like I said, I'm a little bit concerned when we start picking a national standard and saying that that's our gold mark, that we should either be above or below that national standard, because if the national standard isn't rigorous, I'd still rather have us not use that as our comparative. So.
Kevin? Stephen?
I spoke.
So, I can't say that I'm surprised with this, that's why we asked for the data. It's hard to see and look at because, you think back in parenting with your kids, you're like, oh yeah, they're doing great, and then you get this like, wait, what's going on? So there is a disconnect. Looking at the breakout, it's almost like you're getting a proficient unless something extreme happens, one way or the other. But outside of that, you're getting a proficient. Right? They used to talk about you're getting an A in the class as long as you don't miss all the right? You're getting a proficient unless you are an outlier, and we'll just put a couple here and there and do it. Even for the ELA grade 8, that we have 29 kids getting of all the things, 29 exceeding, but only 15 exceeding on the forward. I think it's stark to show that there is a disconnect between what's happening in the classroom and what the students are actually coming away with knowledge-wise. And I know we're doing this each meeting to start building our dashboard. For me personally, information like this, information like the AP results, that's the kind of stuff I want to see, because it shows what we're doing versus what the kids are actually learning. And a separate third-party test, not that, to Stephanie's point, that we have to hit that or that we're teaching to that, just an independent arbitrator grading our students to see, okay, are they really where we think they are? If not, what do we need to do to address it? So as we're building a dashboard, I would like to see metrics like this that compare the two. And I like how you did the 3rd grade, the 8th grade, and we'll have the high school, because we can go across the board and see where the levels are. So thank you for putting this all together. And I'm interested to see, I know you said it hasn't been shared to the teachers yet, what that reaction will be.
Charlie, did you shared some of it with high school?
Even with the 8th grade.
I don't know if he shared this part. We haven't shared our elementary, but he took some of the high school data, because a lot of it from last time was high school.
How was the response or feedback to that? Go ahead.
I'm also losing my voice here, getting over a cold here, but not that this amplifies or anything. But yeah, on the 19th I shared with the staff some of the feedback that we've had from the parent listening sessions, but then also shared the data, and some of them were rather taken aback by the AP numbers in particular. I think when they saw the graph of the number of students who did not take the AP as well, the fact that we had, I think it was like 440 possible students to take APs, and not even half actually took the AP test. I think they were a little taken aback by that part as well. Mixed bag with some staff. Some folks I don't teach AP, so those aren't my kids. My students must do better than that because I teach all the honors. And so mixed bag, and we're still, I guess, breaking down some of the layers of, what the data really is saying and what we need to do to respond to it.
Can I ask you a follow-up question about the registration numbers for the AP exam? So I
Yep.
know an email goes out, it's like a Google Doc where the kids go in to register.
Yep.
Can't the teachers find that information real time each year to see how many of their students, and then they could, I'm probably going down, but
Encourage.
is that a conversation that should have been had to say, you're in this class, why are you not taking the exam? Or maybe they say, I wasn't going to take it going in, and then should the counselors be having, why are you taking this class? You don't take. I'm interested to see how that conversation goes with talking to teachers. Why wasn't there follow-up? Why aren't you talking to students? Not that we have to force them to take it, but to say, you're putting yourself through this, why are you not doing it? So we know. Maybe it's, I'm not going to get credit in college. Maybe they don't know, and so they're just not going to take it, or they don't feel comfortable, whatever it is. But that, to say, well, we didn't know how many, that's something simple. I mean, you can see how many kids registered, right? I mean, it shouldn't be a shock. Sorry, I'm going off the rails a little bit. I apologize, but it just the little basic things that we can control and we can see.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the encouraging piece should be we've got 440 students taking AP classes. That's awesome, but how do we get that actually to be 440 students taking the AP class, getting a 3 or higher, so they get college credit? Because otherwise, why run an AP class versus an honors class?
Anybody have any follow-up questions? No. Thank you, Charlie.
Yep.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I was just thinking about one other thing. So, I don't know, this might come out really clumsy, but when we're looking at exceeds, for instance, is it something where we just need to take a look at a rubric and say, okay, this is now, that success criteria means this is an E, and that students are currently performing there? Or is it something where we might have to look at some additional resources that are at a higher level of rigor, per se, when that rigor relevance that Dr. Olson was talking about, where that an E would be the mark that you would give to that work. So I think it's just a little bit more complicated, and it's just going to take us some time to think through this a little bit.
Absolutely. No, you're right, and I think we all agree because you're pulling the data for the first time. You're seeing this for the first time, and it is going to take some time to figure it out. But I'm glad that you're all working collectively on it. Great. Thank you both again. So on to D, school safety and security.
Yes. So with a couple different events obviously going on, there was a conversation about putting this on here, talking about it publicly, some of the steps, an opportunity to ask questions about that. And I have 8 items here I'm just going to sort of talk about, and we can do some updates. The only thing that I would say is that there might be questions if you ask me about, like, hey, where's this, like, or a very specific thing that we might be doing. I may not be able to answer it publicly because it might compromise the security of things. So if you're saying, like, hey, why don't you have, like, bulletproof vests or something like that? For all you know, I could have one on right now, but I'm just saying, like, there are going to be some questions you might ask, like, do we have this, that I might say that I can't answer that just because of that. So I have, it used to be a time when school districts would put their school maps on their websites. We don't do that anymore for obvious reasons. So there's some things like that, so if I can't answer it, I'll let you know why that is. But otherwise, I'm going to share with you some of the things, and I can talk to you individually, but I just can't do it publicly, maybe with some of the things that we're talking about. So I'm just going to go through some things, obviously, with the recent and sort of, again, an unfathomable school shooting. It sort of causes all of us to sort of sit back and talk about why are we ready, both in the precautionary things and then what you would do in a reactionary mode in both of those. And so we met, meeting with a lot of different parties and groups last week administratively, and sort of jumped a few items up to high priority in terms of what that means that we need to sort of immediately do some things on, and some that are sort of more procedural in that. So I shared with you this fall that we had the Greenfield Police Department review our safety plan and had come back with a lot of suggestions. Some of them were cosmetic, but some of them were more specific, that we needed to do some work on in terms of that. So I'm going to share with you some of the things, and then I can talk about that. So we still do, we have fire drills, and we have lockdown drills, and we have tornado drills, and all of those types of things. But even in some of those procedures, some of those things have changed over the years, and I think sometimes it gets easy to even become complacent with some of those things. So as we know that safety and security is a priority with the referendum and some of the things that we're doing in terms of getting fire code, our fire systems at Edgerton and the secure entrance at Hales Corners, obviously we're continuing to look at a lot of those things. So it is in the forefront of our mind. So to not have a very robust safety plan and procedures obviously sort of doesn't make sense then to put in some of those features. So first thing I wanted to share with you is that we have had some visitor check-in software at the high school for a while, and just added that to our other 3 buildings so it's consistent. However, it's not a very robust check-in system, and I think I came from a place in which we had a program called Raptor, which a lot of districts have, and I think the principals, when we were at something in a different school district last year, had experienced it. And so we're looking at that. We have a demo next week. What that does is when you're a visitor to school district, you actually have to give your driver's license. It runs through there to make sure you're not a sex offender. You can also flag any other, sometimes we have some different situation in which adults have limited access to some of our buildings, and we would be able to flag that so it would sort of come up for the person. Right now, that's not to the level of it is. It then pre-prints a badge that tells not only who you are, it puts a picture of you on there, and it says specifically where you're going in a building. So if someone is caught in a different part from where you can look and see, like, why are you over in the music room? You should be over in the art room or something like that. So we're looking at doing that so it's a little bit more robust check-in system for a lot of different reasons. So that's one of the things that we sort of moved up to the. And as you can imagine, this company is very, if you weren't a school district across the country that was using this system because it's a well-known one, they are extremely busy and backlogged right now. So for them to even get to that point. But a couple of us have used it in other districts who are very familiar with it. So it's not like we're unfamiliar with the product, but want to just talk about what features we can bring here and what that would mean in terms of what we're doing.
So let me ask you, if we did find a person that came in and it was supposed to be at the master room and they're over on the other side of the building, and a teacher or administrative, what do we do?
So they provide training and suggestions and recommendations for that, because obviously, depending upon who they are and what their name is. So the thing is that we have a log for that. We would, obviously you don't want to antagonize a person, and again, it could just be like, hey, I'm a parent, I thought I'd go in and say hi, because every person who's not where they are isn't necessarily, but we would encourage a staff member at that time to sort of call the office and say, it looks like there was a visitor here who said, according to their, they should be somewhere else, but we wouldn't necessarily tell people, or can I help you? It looks like you're supposed to be getting to the music room. Are you lost, or can I help you do that? But we'd have those conversations. So all of this stuff requires us to do some staff training in addition to it. We couldn't just implement, and not just our frontline office people in this case. It would have to be letting all of our staff members know that now the expectation is that every visitor has not just their name, what we're doing now, but it might have some more information. What do you do with that? So we'd have to go some training, and they have some modules on how to do that and some expectations.
So currently we have a free reign to the school?
No, Charlie, or you can help me out. Right now it just prints their name on a badge in terms of that, and they sign in. But I don't know if I'd say free range. I think we usually have someone come and try to meet them in the office, but I don't know that that's 100% abided by in all cases. I wouldn't sit here and say that, but that should be the procedure, that someone comes and gets them from the office and walks them down. That would be our preference all the time.
Whether it be a parent, a vendor, a school board member, whatever it may be?
It doesn't, anybody.
Okay.
Yep. We did.
Can we tighten it up in the meantime?
Yeah, we talked about that. Even we've all gotten a little lax in some of those things about not even having our own school IDs on. Every staff member has a school ID, and wearing just simple things like that. We've talked about, all of me included. It doesn't go with an outfit someday, right? But no, I say I think all of us, so I saw all the principals this last week put in stuff, because Todd had sent out some reminders for all the building principals. Make sure you're wearing student IDs, make sure that all your doors are locked, because that wasn't always, so we sent out 4 or 5 reminders to all of our buildings. The stuff we should be doing, but sometimes if nobody's checking on it or very diligent, they've slipped our minds. So we did some real quick, hey, these are the things we've already said you should be doing. Have your ID on your person all the time, all of those types of things. So, yeah, we can right away get tight on that. Talking about our people who check in visitors, being very specific, making sure somebody is meeting them in the office if they're coming there, if they don't know or recognize them. Even if you're like, oh, I know that person, you know.
That's probably the worst, abuse. Not that that person, you know, is gonna do anything, but sometimes you get a free rein because
Sure, yep,
they've seen you 15 times already.
yep. So, yeah, we'll obviously have to provide some training to folks. Second thing, which I'm not going to give a lot of details on, but we're getting some quotes from some things about our physical spaces for our receptionists, which includes some things from our security company and some other things in terms of each of our 4 buildings have receptionists who are the first people in terms of would be the very first people in that. And so there are some things that we can do with those physical spaces. And so we're getting some quotes and looking at some of that and deciding, where that balance is. And each of our buildings have a little bit different situation in terms of where folks sit. We know that at Hales Corners is a very unique thing because the office is not where you enter into, where in most of the other buildings, that's sort of the entry point. And so that's a little bit unique. So that's something that we're also doing. Third, we do have in our phone system that was established, and it was just reminded because almost everybody, with the exception of Lori, who had her laminated card, our phone system does allow us to have this all-call lockdown drill. So on any phone, if I wanted to immediately activate every phone in the district, I could call a number. I would record a message that we are in an immediate lockdown, and it would go to every single phone in the district, all buildings. So we're going to do a drill on that next week. In terms of just a practice to make sure that that system is using and making sure that folks know when that comes. If you're even on the phone at the time, it interrupts that type of thing. So there are some things that we have with our phone system when it was purchased that just haven't been engaged or practiced or used in simple things like that. So, and that should become part of our practicing thing. So we'll be doing that also.
So who would have the authority to do that, to engage that?
Well, each of the principals would have, they had building codes, and then there's an all-district piece of it. So there's a specific phone number you call in and a very specific code. So depending upon who, you want to have more than one person, but you want to be giving that out to everybody. So I think we're going to review that because there was a list before who had it and who had access to those cards, and so it'd be a very similar process. And our phone company obviously has recommendations on who, how, where, and what those codes are. We also have some things we're trying to look into with our phone system. With 911 calls and if it goes somewhere else internally when that's automatically made, different things like that. So some phone situation things that we're looking at. We are looking at, it was looked at a little bit before, some student staff ID readers, specifically at the high school because of the various ins and outs with students, because some of them can leave themselves if they drive and that. And so our elementary schools, they usually have to have a parent to pick them up. And so we're looking at what those would mean specifically for open campus. Charlie and I talked a little bit. We have about 165 of our 200 seniors that have open campus. And so to eliminate that entirely, we wouldn't have a space or anything for them to go. But we have talked about potentially limiting it to either the beginning of the day or the ending of the day. So there is not this leaving in the middle of the day and coming back. I think that's the biggest concern, to try to limit that once you're here, back and forth thing. So we've talked about potentially, if the schedule allows, if a student is selected open campus, that it's either they come late or they leave at the end of the day, because otherwise we're going to have to find classes for 165 more seniors to take one more class, and that becomes like 2 teachers besides some not happy seniors next year. So you all can run that parent meeting or student meeting probably.
I do every night at home.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah.
We can send more of them over to your house? Okay.
Especially today after the word came out from Mr. Grinch over there.
Oh, okay.
But either way, whether it costs us money or something,
Mm-hmm.
do we all agree that we need to stop the traffic? Is that a best practices?
You're talking with open campus?
With in and
Or
out?
anything.
Or more
Oh, I think,
in.
yeah, I think so. I think that's why you heard almost all the things I've said so far relate to that, whether it's the check-in software, whether it's ID badge readers, whether it's limiting opening, all of those have to do with the in and out and having so many entry points and just making sure that, there's a single point entry, even in some of the buildings, and that, we've talked about that across the board, in high school buildings, and there's different places. I mean, we have security cameras
But
on
you can
that.
exit at many different locations.
Yep. And you have to for security reasons,
I
obviously,
get that.
yep.
I get that.
Yep, so, yeah, I think, and the high school probably has the largest variation of that, just because students are able to come and go for a variety of reasons. They can take themselves to a dentist appointment and return. So there's not an adult that accompanies a child back to, and like literally hands them off to a school personnel, so, yeah.
Can I ask a question, follow up on the exits? If the door is opened during the day, does some sort of buzzer or something go off in the main office so that someone is aware that the door is opening?
No, I mean, if you think about this high school building, which is more than the square footage of like all of our other buildings combined, that we wouldn't have that. Now, there is, I've been in districts that have that, ours does not.
Now, so we have the cameras out there. How often are those cameras checked to see if people are going in and out of those doors?
I watch it on my laptop. We have nobody that sits and monitors it there. We
Sure.
record the footage, and it's there. And if we think, I think that there's, our SRO has it up on her computer all the time. Our receptionist here has it. I mean, on the computers or the screens that are there. I would say when there's an incident or there's something there, I don't think we have somebody who's monitoring it for suspicious activity. It's when somebody tells us, hey, something doesn't look right, then we can quickly go there without physically having to do it. Right now, the Greenfield PD has sort of a tip line that we've encouraged our students to use, but we're also looking into other, what are called suspicious confidential reporting, if students have that, if they aren't comfortable coming to somebody. There's one actually that's been put together by the Sandy Hook people called See Something, Say Something. There's a lot of ones out there, so we're trying to look at just anonymous tip places where students might feel if they saw some suspicious activity, and what's the best way to go about doing that, whether it's an app or just some place where they can go to on our the mobile version of our website to be able to do that. So we're looking into that to try to see what are some options for students to make it very obvious where they can go. We have things like bullying reports that their students know where to go, but something like this, we tell them report it to a school official or law enforcement, but maybe it's happening at night, or maybe they don't want the attention. So we're just trying to provide as many options for students to do that. And speaking of Greenfield Fire Department, we just recently today received some updates on even some of our procedures there, because the question had sort of been talking. It used to be that, our drills are what you do with those, and I think we've noticed in some things across the country that fire drills, when all students are out, or that becomes the way that someone gets students out of a building, right? And so what that means, or how we announce or don't announce, we have students. So I think that we're gonna, take a look at what that is and making sure that we're following procedures with all of those things in terms of where you should, we had a fire drill today, for example, and I think there are some things that we definitely can do as, as watching students come out. And for the most part, they're doing well, but it was just making sure they were far enough, even away from the building and what that means. And, students or teachers had their folders with them to make sure that they could actually report if anybody didn't come out of the building with them. So there are some things we could clearly even tighten up with some of our procedures as we do tornado drills, fire drills, or any of those types of things. So last Friday afternoon, both Lisa Elliott, the superintendent of Greenfield, and I got an email from the assistant police chief who had just returned from an active shooter conference. And so we are meeting with the police department on Wednesday this morning because they have some information that they would like to share about that. And so we'll look at our plan and how that relates to that. So obviously that's a high priority, both with law enforcement who work with schools and school districts right now, in addition to a lot of other places. So we'll be getting some of that information on Wednesday, so I'll be attending that meeting in Greenfield with her. And right now, our building and grounds person, Todd, is at a 3-day school safety conference, and his is more not necessarily crisis type of thing, but there's a lot of other school safety things that in terms of building and grounds things that he can be doing in terms of that. So in addition to things that he finds out with best practices and all of the things that we're having with communications, obviously those have to be updates to our crisis plan. So that's all I have for today.
Any
Anybody questions or comments?
Are we gonna keep this as a monthly item?
You can.
You tell me, I mean,
Well,
I can
think-
report
I
to the
think-
board or
I think
the,
it's not a one and done thing. I think we need to stay on top of it. I think we need to show it's important to us as a
Absolutely.
board. And if we show it's important to us as a board, then hopefully it'll fall down.
So if we leave it under reports each month, we can do that. Yeah.
So, did anyone happen to read the article that was in the paper on Sunday about the school, that I don't remember where it was at, that actually armed teachers now?
Yes, in Missouri.
So they go through did you read that article?
I heard about it, I didn't read that article.
So, yeah, they go through an extensive training, psychological exams and things like that, so that some of the teachers are armed in the classroom. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? I'm not advocating for one way or the other, but just curious.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that we can be doing right now to be, and you heard just some of them tonight, to be a lot more proactive with things that we're doing. In terms of, we have an SRO, if you're going to, I would prefer to see then dollars allocated to an actual security person in a school district rather than arming our teachers. I mean, most teachers did not get into teaching because they want to do that. They got here because they want to teach students. So I would say if we're going to that place where we feel like we need a physical presence of someone who could protect it, I wouldn't say that would be, it's like sort of saying, well, our custodians are now going to teach because, I mean, that's not what the core of what their job is. Someone who's had, I don't know how all of a sudden you have that level of training to the point that makes you feel that confident in there. So I would say if that's where things go, we should be getting dollars from somewhere higher than us locally that would say that we're going to put armed security people who are trained in schools before we would have our teachers do that. I think for a lot of teachers, I think across the country, as you're seeing them, that would be the day they say, "It's not why I got into teaching," and that's it. But,
Well, I think these people have volunteered, actually, and a lot of people have the concealed carry permit and things like that.
Yep.
But, so I was talking to somebody at work today, and we were just talking about the Florida shooting, and they were saying that the president has armed guards, and the governor has armed guards, and there's armed guards at banks and stuff, but nothing at the schools. And kind of how our focus is kind of wrong.
yeah, there was an article which was supposed to be not political. It talked about that. We talk about then there needs to be an infusion of dollars to put us then a very specific across the board, because that's what it would be rather than, I mean, none of us have these budgets that allow us for extra money right now to be taking out of something else. If we're serious about it, you're right. Like, where does that come from? And that I think is a different level of having someone professional at each site, and that's sort of outside of our expertise of what we do. So to say that we're going to take people who are hired for a very different purpose to all of a sudden become that security person, I mean, that's its own occupation and career, in addition to becoming a teacher. So, yeah, it is interesting where our country decides to put that or wherever. And I don't know, it'll be interesting how all of this sort of, what comes out at the other end of it.
Any other?
I mean, we don't have very much attendance here, but what is any kind of security here? There's nothing. And if one of us were to bring something onto the property, we'd be a felon.
Well, yeah, I mean, from, 7 up until 7:45, or whatever time school starts, and when doors are open. Doors are open at 2:45, it's a public facility. It's just not a good situation. But we have to prepare ourselves, prepare our children, prepare our staff to be ready and do the best we can all the time, so that if something may happen, we do the best we can.
I would like to at the next meeting, I mean, this report was a lot on the reactionary side of stuff. There's a lot of proactive stuff we're doing, and I think the board, when you decided to add 2 new social worker positions, the training that Jackie is doing with the mental health first aid, our parent learning academy, on all of those types of things, that's really where some of the emphasis, we need to start looking at some of the signals prior to that. And so I think the emphasis on, what is healthy, stress for a student. And I think that it was well attended, and she and I have talked about doing a repeat on that, because I think it's just this awareness, and I think there's a lot of signs at times, and if people are in tune to that, that's that whole see something. Even I think our parents, parents need to be much more in tune to that. If something does not seem right with your child, maybe it's not, and what does that mean? I think there's always that line that a lot of parents, especially in those preteen, teen years, like, do you back off? And I think together we need to say probably not, especially with all of the things that are out there right now with social media, and that is not the time to be doing that. So there's a lot of proactive things that we're also doing. Tonight seemed like it was all this reactionary stuff and that, but we really want to gear up on this side of what are we doing proactively for equipping, and that's the social emotional learning with our students. How do they self-regulate their own behaviors when they're feeling that point? How do they learn? How do other people see triggers in students and all of that stuff? So that's really where, the district has decided to be very proactive and invest some time and energy and staff into doing that part of it. So I want to make sure that people don't understand we're just on the one side of things, because I think we're really trying to do a lot on the other side of things too. So.
And are we having conversations with our students and our staff?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, I'd heard from some elementary teachers about that. Could we do better? I would think so. But after I'd sent out the first, the one letter just about overall, I think there were some teachers there and age appropriate. How you talk to a 5th grader or a kindergartner or a 12th grader in terms of what that means. So I think more proactively, I think if we have an anonymous tip line, if people are seeing some things like this student was posting stuff on Facebook, a lot of that stuff comes out often after in the investigation, right? So how do we get students after the fact? We get it, hindsight is 20/20, but if stuff isn't feeling right or seeming right, we're getting a few more of those. We had some of those things, and we investigate every one of them, and some of them. So we've talked about, there was a couple things today where students are coming forward, and that's why I really tried to promote that message. We'll investigate it, we'll take a look at it, and if we think that there's a referral that needs to be made in terms of if it's mental health or whatever the case is, sometimes our students are just, well, I was just joking. We really have to talk to them about that is not something you can joke about. Not ever, but especially now. So we need to do a better job about that, where we're going to continue to try to message that.
And I will say that the email that went out, was it yesterday or this morning, the follow-up email about the student situation, it did mention in there the see something, say something. And I did, we had a meeting last week where we talked about, what's being shared in classes and whatnot, and I did follow up at least with my sons, and they've all been told by teachers in classrooms, not on a daily basis, but they've all heard the see something, say something. If something doesn't look right, if you hear something, say something. So the message is out there. I think you're right about doing it more often, but it is out there. The kids are aware of it. So it's not like we're starting over from scratch. That's a bad piece. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so we'll discuss this again at the business meeting in March. And then next will be ESWSA report.
Well, I went maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago we had the meeting, and it was on what was it?
I don't know, you were there.
The thing that we belong to, that you get the
Hanover Research.
Hanover Research. And so it's a resource that we pay for through this association, and it gives us good information for
anything you want. You can, so for, want to do, what is response to intervention? What about adding standards-based grading? What about whatever? So it's a national research thing other districts have put together. They can tell you the best researchers, best practices, what are districts that are doing it. Yep.
And so I think it was approved to re-up with them. They were looking to see how much people use it. And then as the Assembly and Senate end their session in a week, I think, at the most, there's all kinds of bills flying, and we talked about some, and one that was just passed, or made it through the Assembly, didn't make it to the Senate yet.
The Teacher Protection Act,
Yeah.
you mean?
Right?
Correct.
Our representative.
Our senator.
Senator Craig is a lead writer on this bill. And I think we're going to discuss it maybe tonight and after the meeting, and then maybe have a email to the rest of the board members. We should contact him to tell him what we feel about it.
Nope. Yeah, I mean, I can explain what that.
Go right ahead.
It's called, if you've seen it, it's called, I don't know, it's Senate Bill 821, and I can't remember what the correlating assembly bill is, but, so we've talked with law enforcement, there is about this also. So it's called the Teacher Protection Act, and it came about in which, and there's a lot of things that are concerning to us, but part of it is what it's proposing, and it violates some things in terms of students with disabilities and a lot of that, where a teacher would be able to determine if a student would get expelled, if a student would have to leave class, the consequences. And obviously when you have a student with an IEP, there can't be things that are violated, but it gave teachers the ability to discipline in a way that are typically done at a much higher level when you talk about pre-expulsion or expulsion. And I think there was concern in some school districts, or teachers expressed some concern for their safety based on students. And so this is supposed to be giving them, teachers, the ability to make some decisions, of which there are some other things they actually don't have the authority to make some of those decisions of what to do, like to remove a student from class. Well, there's something called FAPE, which is free and appropriate public education, and so there would be a lot of conflicts in this, and so there's a lot of concerns about what teachers this would give them, because there's a lot of contradictions which actually appear in law right now and in terms of what they're able to do. So I have not yet found a public school district or law enforcement agency that supports this, because it's just too contradictory about what it's asking or what it's proposing to do, and unclear on how that would even be able to be implemented as it stands. I think the Senate bill had a few changes from the Assembly bill in it. I haven't read his entire proposal, but I think I just saw that come out from SWSA, so want to read that. But and so I can highlight it a little bit more if you care to read proposed bills or into reading legislation. But and there's some talking points that SWSA had about how would this even work, because if the law says this, how could this happen? You can't have a state statute that supersedes federal law in some cases, because special education is federal law. So there are some things like that. So it's interesting, because for a while they thought it's just not going to gain traction because there were just too many things that were about it. So that's interesting today that we received notice that there was a Senate companion bill. So my guess is that it has to do timing a little bit with the recent school shooting piece of it, but I don't think people understood that it was not really related to that. It was, I think they looked at the name of it or what its code name was and assumed it had to relate to that, and it really does not have to do with that at all. So
Yeah, there are some very vague, I mean, like here, the right of a teacher under certain circumstances to, where did I go here? Civil immunity provided to a teacher under state and federal laws for certain discretionary acts. It could be wide open. I mean, you know, the right of a teacher to use reasonable and necessary force under certain circumstances. So that word, those two words come up quite often.
mm-hmm. Yep. So we have seclusion and restraint laws that are in place where we have to be very careful about when we are even able to restrain a child with a disability. And so this sort of seems like it flies in the face of anything that exists. And I think there are just a lot of people saying, okay, there are things we can do around, but yeah, so.
Anything else from
There's a meeting on the 6th of March.
And Queen also went to and testified or sat with as we gave testify. Yeah,
Well, I
you
think we
should say
said
that.
that already,
Did we?
last meeting, maybe.
Did we? I don't know. I don't think we did. I don't think so.
I didn't give testimony.
No, but you said listened
I
and
gave
supported
support.
people, yeah.
Mhm. Had free lunch.
Was it a good experience, though?
It's a great experience, it really is, if you have, yeah, you know. This was for the Blue Ribbon Committee that is looking into school financing. And SWSA is very well respected in the state. It's probably one of these associations. And it's a large association, 31 school districts belong to it. And we went about it differently. We brought 3 business managers in and let them talk about the aspects of it. Right before us was MPS Superintendent Driver. She's amazing. She really is. Yes, the MPS has problems, but she is amazing. I don't think there's a cure there, but she's very amazing and knows what she's talking about. But the committee really, I mean, we gave testimony for 15, 20 minutes, and we must have had 45 minutes of questions back at us. And and they state right up front, you know, we're doing our best here. Will something come of this? I don't know. Can't guarantee anything, but this is what we've been charged to do, and this is what we're doing. So it really is. You know, it is a different world because it was at a MPS high school, and you walk in and you go through a metal detector. You know, you see personnel in the hallway 24/7, not armed or anything like that, but they're there, walkie-talkies, and but then you see that my free lunch was from the culinary program at the school, and all of them were serving it, and they're very proud that they made this and they're serving it. So there's good and tough things about MPS, but you know, those kids that were serving us the food were very proud of what they served us. So that's all.
That's fantastic. Okay, thank you. So on to 8 items for future consideration. Anyone have anything? Okay. 9, board member announcements. Any announcements?
Playoffs on Friday at home, 7 o'clock, and our girls unfortunately lost, but the boys are still in it.
And we didn't have
Basketball.
anybody for swimming or.
And they had one state swimmer, David Hahn. He was in the backstroke. I believe he finished 9th, if I'm not
Makes
mistaken.
sense.
About wrestling.
6 to sectionals.
Yeah, 6 sectionals, no one made it down the state.
And the boys play their first round this Friday?
The bye tomorrow night because of their
Okay,
seed.
let's not call it a bye. They don't have a play anymore.
Okay, sorry, I stand corrected. They don't play tomorrow night, but
So
they
it'd
play
be
home
Friday,
Friday.
and then if they win, they would also play home on Saturday.
On Saturday night,
Yes.
7:15?
They're all 7.
Oh, 7.
Yep.
Great. Okay, with that, on to item 10, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Everybody wants to stay later, huh? We can try to keep dragging this out. All right, all in favor?
All right.
Opposed? All right, thank you, motion carries.